We are live. I'm with
Yo.
Owen Cox, Filip Lundström, David Högberg, Dimitri Crooijmans. Welcome, guys. More than machine, less than human. This is going to be a little discussion in preparation for an actual physical live event organized by Dark Renaissance Productions in Gothenburg, Sweden. If you're in Europe, if you're outside of Europe and you want to make a longer trip, it's in Gothenburg, Sweden. If you're in Europe, it's only going to be a short flight. If you're in Sweden, you definitely have to come. And we're just going to be discussing a little bit about what is this thing, motives, origin, idea. Owen, why don't you get us started? What is more than machine, less than human? And let's just start circling that.
I think actually David and Philip are the people to go to ask that question to, because it's the two of you guys who initiated this and put together the original conference. So I would say give it to Philip and to David.
Philip, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. So the genesis of this event is actually in the Nietzsche anthology you did, Karel, Abyssal Arrows, and the peer review triad that me and David were placed in. Because me and David, we had this paper called The Digital Desert and the Burning Overman, where we talked about basically individual spiritual becoming in the network age, as opposed to individual spiritual becoming that Nietzsche talked about. So sort of a reading of Nietzsche for our technological moment. And we were placed in a peer review triad with Daniel Fraga and Carl Hayden Smith. And me and Carl started having a lot of conversations about hyperhumanism, which is, of course, what Carl is working a lot on. And we started having meetings regularly about this and trying to develop hyperhumanism. And this phrase, more than machine, less than human, started to repeat itself in my head. And I just couldn't get it out because it felt like a phrase that would describe both machine intelligence and human bodies at this technological moment, or in this technological moment, because it can describe both humans and machines, because now we have machines with, like, just the last year's the surge in generative AI, for example, when we have machines doing things that we didn't perceive was machine-like before, yet they are not human yet. And then we have a human beings who we can't see as machines, but there seems to be something more than machine about human beings, at least how we often conceive of machines. And then, of course, the whole point with hyperhumanism is that we're not human yet, so we're also less than human. So that was what that phrase was about. And this was something I wanted to explore more. But as I mentioned in the last live stream I participated in here, is that I'm not a philosopher. I don't aspire to be a philosopher. I'm more of an artist, and I want to create and facilitate events where we can discuss these topics and also depict them artistically and explore them as artists. So we started working towards making some sort of physical event that was originally just going to be a conference about these themes. But since most of us involved here, especially in the Dark Renaissance Productions, are artists, art became an important part of this as well. So that's why in our event, we have one night of philosophy and one night of art. So it's intellect and body, or however you want to say there. So that was the genesis of this event. Do you want to add to that?
Anything you want to add to that, David?
No, I mean, to me, an important motivation here has also been sort of being part of these intellectual, maybe global networks for some time now, doing a lot of webcasts and discussions online. And there's been a lot of discussions in this liminal web spaces about also how do we actually bring that to a physical environment, and how's that relationship between this virtual space where we can easily connect with the right people without any physical restraints, but then how to bring that to like an actual physical exploration, which is, I think, adds a completely different dimension to it. I've had this experience several times of starting to form relationships online and then actually doing a project together in physical space, and that adds a completely different flavor to the interaction and the potential future projects. So that's a motivation to actually try to bring together speakers from these networks to a local environment, and also engage the local community in that. Actually find artists in Gothenburg, around in Sweden, that can take those concepts and bring them to life artistically, also connecting art and philosophy in this way, and connecting talking with actually doing, so that's an important motivation for me moving into this project.
All right. And this is all connected to Dark Renaissance Productions. And I know Dark Renaissance has sort of a little bit of an intellectual history in these online spaces. Of course, between you and I, Owen, we're involved in the Dark Renaissance versus Game B thing, like, I don't even know, like 2 years ago or something like that. Yeah. What's, what maybe that's a better place to bring you in, Owen. What's the role of the Dark Renaissance Productions, and what's going on there in the birth of that?
Dark Renaissance has stood out as a name for our little subculture subsection of the liminal web, whatever this online world is. And it's been unpacked several times to do a really, really quick run by of it, right? It's that the technologies we have give us an insane amount of access to information, to culture, the entire accumulation of the history of literature, music, a lot of cinema is literally at our fingertips. And there's something in this that is really akin to the first Renaissance, the classical Renaissance we think about, where there was this huge discovery and renewal of culture, bringing together Christian and pagan sources, leading to this high flourishing of European culture. And so there's a possibility for something like that to go on. At the same time, it seems like the same technologies are producing a mass hysteria, mass schizophrenia. People don't know what's fucking going on. A lot of the central structures and the trusted institutions of the societies that we've been looking to quite unreflectively for the last 100, 200, 300 plus years, the politics, the academies, they are breaking down. People are losing faith in them, and the people inside of them seem increasingly disconnected from truth or from a spirit that feels living, that feels genuine. And so these two things come together, a dark age, but also a potential for a massive cultural flourishing. And then if I think about the history that I've had in this world in the last 4 years, starting with Technosocial, which was a podcast that I was doing with Dylan, and then with Daniel Fraga, and then a few episodes at the end with Raven, and then simultaneously started up the Parallax Sangha with Andrew Sweeney, which is where we met Filip and we met David and brought some people together as part of a virtual community, and then have started over the last year or two to come together in physical spaces and having great times hanging out. But I think there is a yearning amongst everybody to make more of a mark, to do things that feel like genuine cultural statements, as opposed to friends from the internet getting together to hang out. And certainly it seems like there's the possibility to do something like that. The amount of artistic and intellectual talent and dedication and energy here is fucking quite impressive. And there's this sense, almost this pressure gradient of, okay, what's going to happen now? And I think what we would like to see happen now is getting together, exactly like Filip and David have said, produce some stuff, make some shows, sing some songs, do some theater, make things resonate with this. When I was actually just reading Dimitri's new article earlier, and maybe this would be fun to bring Dimitri in, but he was talking about philosophy and the mythologization of philosophy and how to take the abstract ideas of the philosophers and turn them into a cultural milieu, so that the people, the tiny minority of people who are going to dedicate their lives to philosophy, and then the rest of people who don't, have some degree of connection between them, and there can be a cultural fabric that is both reasoned and logical, but at the same time expressive and beautiful. It seems like, at the least in the mainstream level of our society, those spheres have fallen so far away from each other. And there is philosophy being done, which I think Dimitri called it philosophers of the letters. It's dry, it's sterile, it's dead, one might say, because it's not creating anything really. It's just saying things. And I think all of these come together with Dark Renaissance Productions to try and express something.
Yeah, I think that is a good place to bring Dimitri in. If people haven't read the article yet, Dimitri, you published an article today on your Substack, and I think that the central thing that did come out to me is what Owen's also pointing out about the philosopher of the dead letters versus basically the beauty of the absolute idea. What are your thoughts about sort of this general move that people are articulating about the need to link the virtual spaces with the physical? And does that connect to sort of philosophy and art and intellect and beauty?
It does all connect, of course. Owen did a recent podcast also with Filip. David, I'm not sure if you were there, with Andrew Sweeney. And there you also talked about this, about aesthetics, basically. And like, what I get from the signifier Dark Renaissance is that Dark Renaissance doesn't want to necessarily return and hold on to any kind of prior movements, but really wants to create true novelty. And so many aesthetics we get this day and age are, of course, like take vaporwave. It's already an old movement, but it's harking back to something like nostalgic elements from the 80s and things like that. So yeah, in this article I wrote, I cited Kanye West, and Kanye West said that, if you're a fan of Kanye West, you're not a fan of Kanye West, you're a fan of yourself. And with that, he exposed that you're, whatever kind of art or music or philosophy you like, you find yourself in it. It's yourself that resonates with yourself. So you're always already a fan of yourself. And I think these new proactive projects like Dark Renaissance, actually doing events like, let's see if we can create theater and also have this kind of unexpected element to it, like bring philosophy and art together. I think it sounds promising and very exciting, to say the least. Yeah.
Maybe we should take a moment to actually say what the event that is conceived will look like. Very simply, over 2 days. The first day will be a symposium with 4 speakers: Cadell, Daniel Fraga, Thomas Hammelrick, and Carl H. Smith. And then the second day will be what we're calling at the moment an immersive gallery, or a cyberdelic cabaret. So the idea of a number of hours we'll have a space, and there will be performances of various sorts within it. And people there will be able to walk around and get a sense of what's going on. It's not going to be a single formal stage, but it'll be more of a fluid space to walk through and explore.
Anything you want to add to that, Filip or David, in terms of the logic of the 2-day structure?
Well, there is something to, there's an overarching narrative to the whole event. And let's say it like this, it will be quite tightly constrained the first day, with speakers and like a running order and everything. Then on the Saturday, we're going to keep it a bit looser, and just loosen that up. So that will be like, the hope is that this event will be very cyberdelic, it will start off very very centralized, and will dissolve throughout the weekend, and then towards the end of it, people will be very confused, and in a good way.
And also importantly, we want to our idea is to also leave room in between the Friday evening event and the Saturday evening event. We want to leave room for a kind of networking cafe or unconference space where people that participate in the event can turn up, and we will have some maybe circling exercises where you can actually bring the conceptual material of the Friday evening to your own particular existence right now, living in this weird society and age, and also just getting to know people that you maybe met the night before, and that will in turn then lay the foundation for moving into the next context, which is the more artistic, immersive exploration on the evening.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about that background that you opened up with, Filip, in terms of, you know, getting into hyperhumanism, that sort of being a theoretical backbone of this whole event. I think when people hear the word transhumanism, everyone kind of knows what that means, but I think hyperhumanism is probably something that people have no idea what it means whatsoever. Maybe we should go into that a little bit. Maybe if you could expand on some of the conversations you might have been having with Carl. Of course, he's one of the speakers on the first day.
Yeah, of course. This is something I'm working out for myself now. So it hasn't been finalized in any way. And hyperhumanism is like, I want to say that is a project. It's not an ideology that is like set and now we're just going to implement it in the world. You know, I don't think transhumanism is that either. It's more like a genre of sorts. And transhumanism is often, I see it as a negation of the human condition. You know, you see certain limitations of the human mind and the human body. You see those as bugs rather than features. Whereas hyperhumanism is an affirmation of the human condition. And that means that these limitations are seen more as creative constraints rather than bugs, you know. So being the human transcendence is not this debugging of a human condition, but it's rather working through the human condition and working, you know, having a critical but affirmative stance towards modern technology. So we're not just being technology first, you know, but at the same time not being a Luddite either. So it's this like technology tightrope walking, and the view that we're not human yet, but we're discovering what that is, and we're discovering that using technology as a mirror, and using technology to develop new literacies about what it is being, what it is like being a human being at this moment, and where that can take us. So I'd say that is the base definition that I'm working with now, for starts.
Yeah. Any thoughts there from you, Owen or David, on specifically hyperhumanism as this affirmation of the human condition? I particularly, you know, what particularly stands out to me and resonates with me in some of the conversations I've been having is, you know, working through the human condition as opposed to coming up with transcendent visions of either overcoming the human condition or, you know, imagining some utopian human condition.
Well, I can give a practical example, actually. So I'm working with a startup at the moment called Others. People can check it out on Instagram. It's Others with the O with a line through it. But I think if you search others.co, you'll find it. And the vision with this company is to do something.
Did Owen drop out for you guys?
Yeah.
He was about to disclose some secret there.
Yeah. I've actually, have either of you guys played around with the Others app or the website? I've listened to a lot of Ebert stuff on the Others app, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, I've heard some of it. That's cool. It's
Okay, we've lost
really
Owen.
stuck.
Unfortunately.
yeah, but maybe I can fill in a bit there with I do think that there is something very Nietzschean about hyperhumanism, and that's why I know Carl started to work with hyperhumanism in the anthology, because what we ultimately want to get away from is a view of the human being as fueled by resentment or something like this, which is of course what a lot of transhumanists offer, and a lot of other forms of popular discourse, in the light of ecological collapse or something, that human beings are something horrible or whatever. But rather it's like hyperhumanism takes a stance that, well, human beings are fundamentally liminal beings, and we can take a lot of different turns now, and we got to know the human as deep as possible in order to know what is actually possible here. So it is in a way in my estimation, a profoundly Nietzschean ethic about being human at this technological moment.
Yeah, and also I guess today there are both these movements that one of them wants to go back to some human essence that once was, but then was lost because we had all these technologies, and we've lost our essence somehow. So we need to go back to nature and find that again. And there's some truth to that. But then there's this other more transhumanist movement that wants to maybe escape the human condition altogether, and sort of bypass the body and our more natural condition or evolutionary existence. So I really, what I like with the hyperhuman idea is to just work with that contradiction, between man and machine constantly. That we're always going to need to work that through, that relationship.
Dimitri, in your studies of philosophy, how does the term hyperhumanism, or in your studies of Nietzsche, how does the term hyperhumanism resonate with you, or does it?
Yeah, I think it's encapsulated by this title, right? More than machine, less than human. And isn't it like today we live in a world that people are talking about, oh, are you not feeling well? Just update your thinking, man. Just update your software. You work just like an operating system. It's all variables and things like this. And no, we're more than machine. And what is that more? What is that more? That's spirit. But we're also less than human. And this means that we don't really live up to to being human. Maybe we live up to being inhuman. Sometimes I feel like that. So yeah, there's it's really it's so despicable to me, this ideology of reducing organic or spiritual functions or like spiritual phenomena to mechanics, because they're both wrong. Like we're not mechanical. Not even our organic body is mechanical in that sense. There's something that goes above that because it's purposeful, right? That's what biology has. Not a theology of transcendence, but definitely immanent. So yeah, if that's what hyperhumanism means, then I'm definitely sympathetic to this type of reading. And yeah, like there's a lot of talk about different crises we have. I'm not gonna enumerate them. Then we might choose, okay, which one is the primary crisis. And if someone would put a gun on my head and tell me what's the primary crisis, I would say it's of a soul. It's of the nature of the soul and the spirit, and then someone might accuse me of being very much like New Age, but I think this is right. Like, and this is right personally, if we really want to elaborate on this hyperhumanism, personally, I would naturally tend to religion philosophy, and art, since these are the three conceptual phenomena that truly differentiate us from animals. And of course, Gerard can barge in the door at any moment right now and tell me, no, it's mimesis, stuff like this. But isn't it in these three facets, religion, art, and philosophy, that the nature of mimesis comes to us in its most peculiar idiosyncratic forms? So what I personally like about this event is that we really want to bring this like techno gypsy philosophy from the internet to art. And like, if you are listening to this and you haven't heard anything about this event, the way that we talk about it might seem very vague. That's because this event is an experiment, and definitely not an experiment as in some kind of spontaneous experiment. It has been, people have been working up to this point for years, and it's going to culminate in something beautiful, tremendous. I believe this, but yeah, this is what comes to mind for me.
Oh, and
Working, let me just maybe finish my thought. Working
Sure.
at the intersection of philosophy, art, and religion with other living spirits who want to bring forth something truly novel, not for the sake of something being novel, but because there is an urgent need for novelty.
I love that. Owen, before we lost you, I think we ended with you telling us some vision for the Others app. I'm not sure if you want to bring back that thought or connect it to what Dimitri was saying, but feel free.
I can say it very simply. What I was trying to do is give a practical example rather of where discussions around hyperhumanism came into a real conversation, which was that there's this startup called Others. The idea is that there's lots of these meditation, yoga, wellness apps and platforms appearing out there, all of which are unconsciously in this positivistic, new age, feel calm, feel good, be well approach to what the good life is. The idea with Others is to do something that's more nuanced, got more depth to it, that digs into the depths of the human condition and can express more of the beautiful and the light, but also some of the darkness and the pain, and have a platform essentially for people to be able to connect with that. Part of the conversations as well have gone to this sphere of biohacking, which is adjacent to this world of new age wellness. And there are lots of people developing biohacks, technologies, rituals that you can do that are supposed to, well, it's literally in the name, extend your capacities, do more things, overcome this, overcome that. And we were going, what's our take on biohacking? And then we started to think, what is a human-centered take on biohacking, in that rather than trying to use technology to overcome ourselves and overcome our limitations, but actually to become more human? What is a technology, an approach to technology that emphasizes humanity at the core with all of its messiness, and is interested in extending our capacities to express that, to know that, to be that, to become that? So here was where that distinction between hyperhumanism and transhumanism, we were able to go, let's not go in the transhumanist direction. Let's try and feel forwards without becoming reactionaries, without falling into this sense of technology is bad, it's ruining us, it's undermining society, we need to go back to Christian normativity where we all hug and go to church. No, we can do something different, but we also don't have to be dreaming about living forever.
It seems like a lot of what it means to become more human in regards to the technical sort of narratives of transhumanism is to embrace more of the messiness, to embrace more of the negative affects, the negative emotions. Is there something about the, we'll get to sort of the speaker list and we'll get to some of the topics that are going to be discussed a little bit later, but is there something I'm here just sort of like an agent being put on the stage of this dramatic performance, and you guys are really sort of weaving a spider's web behind the scenes. Is there something in what you guys are planning in terms of the aesthetics, in terms of the stage, in terms of the the entire scene that is designed to sort of bring out a more organic feel, as opposed to, like, say, an academic conference, which is more, very rigid and perhaps even, like what Dimitri was talking about the philosopher of the dead letter? That's just a general question for you guys.
Yeah, I think this is a good point to talk about, mine and David's both research and involvement in burner culture, for example, and using co-creative methods to create events and spaces. And that is something we're doing here as well. And that inevitably becomes messy. It's also perhaps the only, but it's certainly one of a few ways to create events that are decentralized and in such a way they are surprising even to us who are the creators of the events. So much like creating an internet forum or something like that, you create a stage and you invite creators to that with a narrative, with a theme, with concepts. Then you just watch people be creative with that. So we're working a lot with methodologies like that, and that is really exciting. And what we actually find is a lot of the people who are like the artistic burners, who are very much embodied and in the moment, they are craving philosophy and want more complicated arguments and more concepts. So we have a lot of people being involved in this who are perhaps not as well read philosophically as, well, me and David, and of course you guys here in this room, but they want to be more involved in that. And from like the Dark Renaissance Productions point of view, we've been very involved in the internet, and being very intellectual for the last years. And we of course want to see more art and stuff in physical happen. So that's been a nice meeting to see, some people craving more art and more physical events, and some craving, more philosophy and more, being more in the mind. So we're aiming for these two zones to meet during this event. And of course, some of it will be dark because we're the Dark Renaissance and we want to create a space where people can express that.
I mean, one of the biggest pushbacks I saw when we were talking about the Dark Renaissance, one of the biggest pushbacks on the intellectual side is that it slides too much into nihilism, or it slides too much into postmodernism. Do you think this is just a straw manning of an argument? What is the argument, or the philosophical case, or the artistic case, indeed the artistic case, for emphasizing the darker materials? I mean, on my first sort of reflection, I just would want to throw out, like, the greatest artists and the greatest, even going back to like alchemical processes, it's always about working with the darkness. It's always about working with, the shit of human life, especially for literature and music. Any thoughts on this point?
Well, this leads me, of course, to my past in the Scandinavian black metal scene, which is a scene that thrives on, darkness, and, you're going to talk to the devil and you're going to burn churches and whatever. And, I had a great time there. I learned a lot. I did a lot of weird things, not as weird as in the burner scene, perhaps, but, a lot of weird things. And, but what struck me was that we were all there to explore darkness. But when everything is dark, it doesn't really dark, it just gets shallow. And the problem with black metal, for example, is that at the end of the day, everything is about selling t-shirts nowadays. That's something that has already happened. We can't really work with that music, and that scene to explore darkness, because you got to have the light stuff as well. And it can be predominantly dark, but you got to have at least a few rays of light there to actually illuminate, so you can see how dark, how deep the darkness is or can get. Otherwise, you're just working with illusions. So that is something important to us as well, and something important for anyone who wants to explore darker themes in art in general. That if you're only doing that, you're just building these shallow illusions that you get stuck in. Yeah.
What about you, Owen? From our conversations in the Dark Renaissance, what do you think's the importance of that? I mean, emphasizing the dark dimension of things. And
Sure. Well, I mean,
bringing
what
that
comes to
side out.
mind immediately is that obviously one of the things you think or feel when you hear dark is scary. But there's also just the element of hidden, the things that can't be seen, or the things that can't be said, the things that are difficult to cast light on, or the things that take a certain amount of time or dedication or skill to reveal and uncover. It's not just that the darkness is this scary, monstrous place, but it's that things move there that don't move in, say, the ordinary daylight. And so I think part of the ethos with a conversation about a dark renaissance is giving voice to elements of 21st subjectivity that aren't often given voice to. Paradoxes, confusions, reflections on the state of affairs, and real reflections on the state of affairs at the moment that aren't necessarily trying to fix, aren't trying to mend, that aren't trying to stamp some nice coherent vision of how things ought to be and how we're going to get there. There's none of that in Dark Renaissance and an idea as the idea. It's much more of let's be with the process of what's happening. That's what comes to mind at the moment, building on what Filip said.
Dimitri, you want to jump in here?
Yeah. Oh, and this is such an important point, because the vast amount of like academic theorists, I have to say it, who I see and always talk about like, let's change the world, let's have these slogans. But it's so important, like, let philosophy be philosophy, let theory be theory, and then let art be art, and let there be a distance or a rift between them, because this is the only way that they're both gonna be proper, like gonna shine in their own aesthetic in a good way. Like when you have theory that's always in this mode, and this is actually what the entirety of Hegel's corpus kind of was for, to critique this stance, this idea that, oh, we're gonna get there asymptomatically, but we just have to fix this tiny little theoretical thing, and then yeah, and yeah, I see this so many times, and it reeks of banality. Like there's no oomph there. There's no, I don't see there any power there coming. I'm not gonna name names. You can think about this yourself. But yeah, like this is something that's I'm looking forward to see how this is going to manifest in March 1st and 2nd. But yeah, this is it's extremely important that, like, when you go over to intellectual side, a lot of times intellectuals have this because they're dealing with this this slave morality, this resentment, that they go inside, and then they want to kind of come out of themselves and do it in this way that they it's almost as if they somehow believe in this kind of magical manifestation, that if you think about this theory well enough, it will automatically instate it in its reality. But yeah, definitely a lot of Marxists are very very guilty of this, of this idea that you can just, that you are not there yet in the theory, and once you'll be there, it will totally align with your practice, and then you can just go with your practice in a non-thinking manner. And it's as if they want to get to this non-thinking state. But this is of course, I don't believe this is what the Dark Renaissance is about. And it's all the better for it, because it's a good question. Like, how do you, like, in my own life, I've tried to I've made some music inspired by a lot of philosophy, and one way that you can summarize Zizek's corpus is that there is no big other, or even more precisely, there is a non-other. So there's no guarantor of meaning, but still meaning is a thing in the world that has a certain type of efficacy. So even if things are like strictly meaningless, by your very practicing in the world, meaning comes forth. Like, Pascal said, if you don't believe in prayer, just pretend you believe, and then and do the prayer, and then it will come. Like, this is kind of the Zizekian lesson. But like, how do you make art out of this? And it's not really like, what does hip hop, in my case, what does hip hop have to do with German idealism or Lacanian psychoanalysis? It doesn't have anything to do with each other. Nothing. The only thing which it has to do with each other is what I make of it, like my singularity. And this is important about the nature of singularity and universality in art, is that art, when we watch something or we listen to something, the beauty of art always comes from the outside towards us. Something speaks to us, like the film speaks to us, the work speaks to us, and it's something in yourself that's somehow external and speaks back to you. It's a discovery that's nonetheless an invention. So on the one hand, there's a universal truth coming to you. On the other hand, it's solely possible in the singularity of the you. And this kind of split between singularity and universality is not to be overcome, because that's the nature of art. And that's it's very important to be precise about the role of philosophy, and to understand that philosophy is not there to tell you what you should do with your life. Like, a certain type of art can bring forth a certain type of style, like if you want to be a rapper or a metalhead or something like this, there's a certain way of composure that goes about this certain type of jargon even too. And I've also seen this like with other artists. It's maybe not really relevant to this conversation, but I see some people try to take up rapping, and I see, like, this is not you, man. Like, you pretend to be the rapper type, like hyper masculine, like the cool dude, and it's like, no, you can see that this is not you. So why don't you make your own thing out of it? And there's even a famous rapper artist who went, like, he totally went for this like rapper aesthetic, and then kind of scared the shit out of himself because it wasn't him, and he was just pretending this whole like rapper persona to the big other. Then he stopped rapping. But of course, maybe not what he should have done because he couldn't, but it's about making something your own, and that's where true novelty is created, in like bringing things together that have nothing to do with each other, seeing the universal truth in both sides, and bring it forth in your own singularity.
I was just thinking there, Dimitri, about your critique of most intellectuals, or at least intellectuals working within the slave morality. You specifically brought out Marxists as a type of universality that's obfuscating singularity, because they don't have that oomph you were talking about, or they don't have that power, precisely because it's just sort of like an abstract universal. It doesn't have that singularity attached to it or worked through.
It's very hard to do, like to throw yourself in the concept. And I mean, I will echo what was said earlier in this conversation, is that if you look around in like the systems that people operate in, like the institutions and things like this, so much of it is so utterly soulless, and it's just like Aristotle would say to them, there's no practical wisdom in it. There's no practical wisdom. But this was important for Aristotle. But like we cannot talk philosophically like what's gonna be the style of Dark Renaissance. But still, there is gonna be a Dark Renaissance style or vibe, or there already is. There's emerging it imminently. So that's
I mean, the utter soullessness to me is so connected with the risklessness of the entire enterprises of modern institutions. I mean, I think, whatever brings together our work, there's a risk involved. I mean, I feel like even, doing this event, there's some sort of risk involved, in the sense of putting something on that has no guarantee, has no, there's an abyssal act to it.
Yeah, that's also why it was important for us to not call this a conference, because it's not a conference. It's a symposium. We're going to be in a club and we're going to do philosophy. It's a symposium. It's not a conference. It's going to be risky. It's going to be loud. And it's not going to be like anything you'd see in an academic institution. So yeah, we're going to risk it.
Owen, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Filip nailed it, but there's something, just going back a second, thinking back to Dimitri's paper, right, where you were talking, again, I think I mentioned it once, mythologizing the ideas. Or even what art can do is mythologize the base world life experiences of people. I mean, hip hop's come up. So hip hop creates a beautiful mythology out of raw urban underclass life, and has taken on a character of universality that then people, kids who've grown up in nice, comfortable, healthy suburbs can participate in it and enjoy it and have a sense for that world without running away from, you could say, even the darkness or the brutality of it, but actually managing to alchemize the shit into the gold. And there's something in this, there is an activism immersed in art and its capacity to do this alchemical work, but it's not an activism at the level of here are X problems and we're going to solve X problems with Y solutions and we're going to wave a magic wand and we get everybody going to a particular type of performance or lifting up a particular type of performer and that's going to solve the issue, which I think actually is often the level of activism that a lot of our institutional academics and even artists who are getting put into, say, big exhibitions now are working under. There's a difference. There's something in, I mean, something William Butler Yeats said that I always think about it, and I don't even really know what the fuck he meant by it, but it bears deep meditation, is that he said, the poet is able to see the entire life of a race to come in his work, and he sings his song to them. He said something like that, and it reminds me of Nietzsche saying he's singing to the children of the future as well. He's saying, I don't even have people who are capable of reading me or understanding me now, but people in the future, they are my children. They're what I'm trying to express. This is the myth I'm casting to bring this thing together in the future, which is not the same as going, I'm alive in whatever year it is, 1872, and we have this issue with the Prussian government, and I'm going to write a book to deal with it.
Do you have a question for Owen, Dimitri?
Yeah, I have it's a bit of an extended question. It's actually to everyone here, because you guys are more familiar with the metal scene. Of course, I'm more familiar with the hip hop scene. And there's this thing where there's this interesting relationship between politics and art, right? Because sometimes rappers go political and it's horrible. It's absolutely dog shit what they create. You can see, like, this is just propaganda. And that gets rid of any nice aesthetic sense to it. And I bet this is also the case in metal, that there's maybe like rightists or leftists who are just way too propagandistic. Do you guys see that? And what do you think about like this relationship between art and politics, and also again, like letting art be art? Like, it doesn't mean you don't have to have a political message. Like, there can be, subliminal political messages in your art, or like an active political stance, but the way that's manifested, it's very subtle, and it very quickly turns into shit.
I think that's the thing. I mean, I would say I think there's good left-wing metal, there's good right-wing metal, and there's terrible left-wing metal, and there's terrible right-wing metal. There's something in, like you said, art can be political. Art is often powerful when it is political, but it can also go horribly wrong when it becomes propagandistic or preachy, as opposed to, I think, initiating people, or at least showing people what it would be like to live, to think, to exist, to have come into the world a certain way, and to build a human appreciation perhaps for this worldview, as opposed to saying this is the problem and this is how it ought to be. It's, again, I think once art becomes prescriptive as opposed to expressive, then it loses something. That isn't to say, as I said, that it can't be activistic and it can't actually be aimed at galvanizing a community, building a movement, shifting some kind of energy through culture.
Expressive versus prescriptive. Is that distinction coming out?
Yeah, I think that's I think you hit it on the nail there. And there's also like there's always internal paradoxes that emerge there too. Because if the prescription is to express yourself, it's still a prescription. You see, so like there's even in Hegel's philosophy itself, because Hegel really didn't want his own philosophy to be prescriptive. But then again, it's paradoxical, and in a sense that there is something prescriptive, even because of the fact that it is visionary, and that there is this aspect to like, yeah, to make something for the future. And then there's two aspects to this, because there's a way in which art is indeed like for the future children, but the way I look at my own art and philosophy is that it's creative autobiographical work. So it's like not only retroactive, but it's like that time that Lacan mentioned. I believe it's like the future interior, like the what will I have been. And when I make a song, it's like, what will I have been? Well, I will have been this song at this time and this place, right? Or this album at this time and this place, or this event at this time and this place. And this is kind of like that self mythologization, and it's a giving of freedom to the imaginary. And this is actually a meaning of sublimation, because as Cadell recently explored in this article, sublimation is without repression. It's not a repression.
I think now having in some sense set the stage for what's going on with the Dark Renaissance, some of the ideas motivating it, the discussions around hyperhumanism, sort of distinguishing, on the one hand, distinguishing from transhumanists and sort of trying to affirm the human, affirm the messiness, the negative affects, the negative emotions. Of course, that brings us into conflict with a lot of traditional academic performativities, as well as theorizations, institutional life, and so forth. Maybe we could talk a little bit about the speaker list to start. I'm on the speaker list. There's Thomas Hammerich, Carl Hayden Smith, Daniel Frege. Why foreground? Maybe David or Owen. Why foreground?
I just make one more point, and it's pertinent because it gets to our situation. One of the great Dutch authors is Couperus. He was a really great writer. He was gay. He's also, compared to Oscar Wilde, he would have been famous if he didn't write in Dutch, but he was stubborn like that. And there was a great Couperus museum, but now they are closing it down because actually someone in the Labour Party said, well, this museum is elitist because it's a literature writer, so that's elitist. So we are going to close down. We don't have subsidy for this because it's nothing to do with workers. And this is really the most vile way to think, that the high arts like philosophy or literature are for some kind of, what the fuck, like aristocratic elite in some kind of posh sense, who wear the right clothes and things like this. And like, no, high culture doesn't come from those like usually boring academic rich people and stuff like this. So it's but this is a way that our that this soulless system kind of thinks. It thinks that whatever is high, literature is high, and if you have all the university degrees, that's high, so that's good, and that's also elitist. So that's not for workers, and what's for workers is like McDonald's and these kinds of things. And I'm so against that. And I think Dark Renaissance is also a good example again of showing that it's not like this. You can birth high culture with workers, with people who don't have degrees. Probably they are going to be way better at it because they actually dare to, to take risks. Not to say you don't have, it doesn't matter if you have a degree or not, but like taking risk itself is this artistic gesture par excellence. Going inside the abyss and like self-making, confronting yourself with this unknowing in a collective or individual sense.
All right. So in that context, again, I'd be interested to go a little bit into the speaker list. Why the, is there anything particular that, I'm thinking here to David and Philip, maybe Owen as well, that you guys were thinking in terms of bringing this specific group of thinkers together? Again, in terms of the speaker list, Thomas Hammerich, Carl Hayden Smith, Daniel Frege, and myself, is there a vision here that aligns with what we've been talking about in regards to Dark Renaissance production, hyperhumanism, and adjacent topics?
Yeah, well, the reason why we chose these 4 speakers is because I think the 4 speakers have 4 different strong perspectives on this issue of being human in this technological moment. So, of course, Carl, hyperhumanism is his thing. He's good at telling that story, so that's why he's there. And he also brings a lot of, anecdotes from his adventures. That's always good, that's fun. Frege is a designer, so he's actually he's being creative in this intersection between man and machine, being an AI designer. Thomas Hammerich brings in the mimetic perspective, which I think is a downplayed but very important part of this being a human being, and especially when you connect mimetics to the internet and to machine intelligence, data science, and all that. That's an important discussion. And of course, you, Cadell, you're speaking as well, and that is actually your philosophical and critical perspective. That's why we chose this list of speakers.
Any other reasons you want to add to that, Dave, or any other perspectives you want to add to that?
So I think a lot of the theoretical background to this event is that, okay, now we're in a society with internet technology, right? So we're moving from being humans with writing and printing and so on to actually have these interactive technologies. And I would say these speakers have different points of view on this sort of technological paradigm shift. I would say Carl, for example, wants to really like what's this thing that's the cyberdelic space, right? What is this cyberspace, and how can we shift our attention and our state using the different technologies that surround us now? And Daniel is maybe like, how can when we get networked with other human beings, our technological environment are also going to affect our subjectivity in different ways. So we're going to be mindful. We need to be mindful how we interface with different algorithms and different network flows that we're part of. And Thomas Hammerich, of course, is moving back to the anthropological sort of core of our mimetic mechanisms that guide our desiring and how we go into conflicts with other human beings. And that's, of course, escalating when we're connected to billions of people all of a sudden. So yeah, and then Cadell, you of course have a lot of ideas about the like global brain singularity and theories around the technological singularity and so on that are made possible or enter the stage here when we have network technologies. So that's one way to frame it as well.
I don't know if Owen or Dimitri want to jump in, but what I was going to do was just sort of bring up some of the major signifiers that come to my mind when I think of this group of thinkers, and maybe we could run with that. I mean, the first idea that's coming to my mind is sort of the centrality and the power of the concept of mimetic rivalry, and the way Thomas Hammerich frames that in his work, and how sort of central and integral that's been in a lot of conversations over the last 2 years, over the last 3 years. And specifically sort of his framing that I think is much needed in sort of the larger ideology of Silicon Valley and transhumanism, which is that, you have people like Mark Zuckerberg who just want to connect the entire planet, 7 billion people, and have a very utopian vision about the consequences of that interconnectivity. But I think what Thomas is always bringing up is that what's often underthought in these circles is precisely that you are creating some sort of mass undifferentiation where everyone's going into competition with each other. And all of a sudden, like, people who have no, people who would have had no capacity to compete and interact with each other in a pre-internet, pre-networked age are now all of a sudden competing with each other. And this actually creates, an insane environment for specifically like competition of imagos, competition of images. And maybe that this is actually one of the motives for wanting to become more physical, is that when you're in the online, you're in this sort of competition of imagos, which the physical might, in some sense dissimulate. I'm not sure. These are some ideas coming to my mind, Owen. I'm not sure you want to engage with that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's something about shit gets real when you get into the physical, and you have to just confront a lot more of yourself and of other people. It's much easier to feel like you have a big, flourishing, lively social network online than to actually hammer out friendships and alliances in the flesh. But if you don't have that, then exactly as you said, you have floating imagos. I think to this topic of the speaker list, just something I want to emphasize as well. I think all of the 4 speakers are interestingly positioned with quite a broad range of their subject interests. So, for example, Cadell, you've written extensively about the technological singularity, but also have a deep, deep grounding in psychoanalysis. Thomas Hammerich is a researcher of AI, practically working with these new technologies, and that's taught me things about them. And at the same time is a deep, deep student of cultural anthropology, human anthropology, and religion. Daniel Fraga is working at the front lines of AI technology design, as well as doing deep theoretical work on what is a human in the context of this age. And Carl is also working in shit tons of technology labs all over the place, as well as being a serious internationally renowned psychedelics researcher and personal researcher, subjective stuff. He's been doing the DMTX trials in London, where people get put under DMT for extended periods of time, hours at a time, intravenously. And so every one of these speakers, it's not just an expert in one field. It's an expert in several fields that come together with bizarre and interesting conversations. There's a real practicality to it. And I think that is going to be one of the things that hopefully shows some of the most interest. And on the one hand, we have people who are experts in the sphere of technology, thinking AI deeply, working at the very horizons of where this stuff is going. They're not just academics thinking about it and kind of theorizing in the abstract. They're people whose life and blood and economic status is actually tangled up with the creation and development of these things. But then are also not, I think you mentioned about Mark Zuckerberg having rather a naive vision of connecting everybody. There's also, I would call it, a deep humanism to what everybody's got a different take on it, but everybody's also bringing in a study of what actually are we? What are we as animals? And what does that mean? And that's why I think it's going to be rich.
I just want to sort of reaffirm the interestingness of the speaker sort of panel being at this sort of radical interdisciplinary level, in the sense that it's not this sort of bland interdisciplinary comparative studies or something like that, but it's sort of people who are genuinely interested in many different aspects of the world, and bringing them together in sort of a unique fusion, which creates radical singularities. and consequently, I think for people who think like that, also in connection to, what we've been talking about in the first hour, is that it's very hard for people who attempt to build a career like that to find a home in contemporary institutions at all, because how do you categorize these people? How do you really categorize what Carl's doing? If you take the totality of what Thomas Hammerich's doing, or Frege, I mean, none of this stuff really fits. And so in some sense, it's all sort of like a bunch of people who don't really fit, and it's sort of like the cracks coming through, and the Dark Renaissance can sort of be like this space of holding all of these sort of very genuinely interesting thinkers, but don't really have a box to fit in. Was there anything that, go ahead.
Way to actually think about the types of people, thinkers, artists who seem to be being drawn to this Dark Renaissance thing, is that they are all exactly as you describe, people who have fallen through the cracks, who don't really easily fit or have a home in the other places. And this thing, it remains, there's something going on, but it's not super precisely defined, precisely because it is this interdisciplinary hub of the thing, of almost the shadows of the mainstream institutions and places and spaces.
I also want to bring it back to this idea of specifically mimetic rivalry in the context of the online network dynamics. Is there anything that comes up for either, Filip, David, Dimitri on this topic?
Well, it's of course a lot, especially when we talk about the dark stuff, because the mimetic rivalry awakes all that, because the real shit, if you want to get real, you got to go through the darkness, and that is, generally speaking, sex, violence, death, and intoxication. And mimetic forces, especially in a network age, just thinking about, for example, how psychedelics are talked about on a lot of internet forums, the mimetic models we create there, and how risky that might be actually, and also like what good that has done, because now these things are getting researched, for example. But and of course this is the whole, the society of spectacle, and getting caught in all these images, that we have, like, being connected to these flows gives you the illusion that you are actually in touch with these things, but you're actually not. And that's why we crave these physical spaces where we can explore these, what we call the darker topics. So that's what comes up for me here. And
David or Dimitri, mimetic rivalry bring up anything for you? I mean, the world of floating imagos, sort of being sort of radically disconnected in the society of spectacles, and trying to, in some sense, enact some counter movement to this process, or at least some balance.
It's absolutely insane, honestly. Like, it's this situation is, I don't think it's really overseeable for any one of us, but certainly the dynamic is absolutely crazy. For myself, I mean, I notice it in my own life, like with other artists, like, you find out about another artist and you just immediately get jealous, like, holy shit, this person has done all this stuff, they're younger than me, they have all this, they did all this. Or also that you notice, oh, this person absolutely detests me, like, this person is so jealous and they've got nothing going on for them. And so this is the day-to-day of mimetic rivalry, like on all those platforms. And it's generally it's weird that this whole idea about followers and things, like people that watch what you are doing, but then when they see you on the street, they will not greet you. They do not care. Yeah, so there's stuff like that. That's what it makes me think about. And it's yeah, you can see also the extent to which the like the governance of the image, the image that governs, really makes you feeble to withstand drama. And especially like what I've seen, with the war in Gaza, and I'm just using it as an example. I could use many other examples, but is like how caught up so many people got into emotions that were like determined by images. They saw something on Instagram, or they saw something on another platform, and immediately like exploded, and it's like, oh well, what has that to do with your daily life? And oftentimes it's nothing that has to do with one's daily life. So there's this extremely perverted catharsis that people can get from these images. Like you can like have your own life with all its problems, but then you feel good because in the comment section you could say that really those children never deserved it. And who are you, to say that Israel has the right to defend itself? And just examples. It doesn't even matter what the content of what I'm saying, but like we've never really had to deal with this as humans. So now we are, and yeah, I really think the situation is not overseeable for any one person, certainly.
I mean, it's just bizarre. And again, I want to bring it back to sort of the way Thomas always frames this is in the context of, he always says the same thing, the 200, 300,000 archaic human, hundreds of thousands of years old, developed for a world or evolved for a world with, max, where we're talking about 250 connections, 250 social connections. And now, within such an insanely short time period, basically you're connected to hundreds of millions, billions of people, and what does that do to us cognitively? What does that do to us psychologically, that we can just be exposed to so much about what is the human condition? I mean, I think, and at the same time is like, this is such an irreversible process. This is the future of humanity. There is no going back to a more tribalistic, localist way of existing. And I wonder if, my sort of reading of the contemporary moment is that there is a desire for sort of particularist communitarian revivals. And I wonder if this particularist communitarian revivals is a symptom precisely of being overwhelmed by billions of imagos and just being like, I cannot process this much difference.
Yeah, I mean this radical exposure of all of this also calls for some kind of reinstatement of containers and boundaries. Like, and that's also something we're quite interested in. Methods for context design or ritual design. How can we actively set a container where we can explore things that are otherwise constantly exposed to us, so that we can sort of slowly work through certain desires that are being evoked in us all the time. And I mean, throwing an event is a form of context design as well. Like, what kind of experiences do we want to host in this space? What are we not allowing into that space? What do we want to? How do we want to guide a certain experience and so on? And the Thomas is of course also talking about this in terms of ritual, and religion, and the importance of those different parts of religion, the sutric aspect, the more strict and rule-based religion, and the tantric spaces that are more explored.
I mean, I want to bring it up. Maybe that's a good time to bring up like this distinction of Sutra and Tantra on a personal level. Like, what does the distinction of Sutra and Tantra mean to all of you? I mean, it's something that always gets brought up, and it's become sort of like a meme in our groups, the Sutra and the Tantra, and it becomes applied to so many different things. And it, even Dimitri, you see you laughing. You wrote a paper called Hegelian Tantra, so like. It's just these have far-ranging sort of application. It seems like that these have become words that work in our community. So why do you think that is? How does it resonate with each of you? Whoever wants to jump in here, please do.
Well, I suppose why it's resonated for me is going back to the conversations about heavy metal, coming from the heavy metal scene and also spending time in the hippie rave scenes. Having been in a lot of Dionysian, intensely drunk, intensely drugged up, highly sexualized situations, but without any cultural boundaries around it other than a security guard at the door and a legal system that says what you're doing here is technically illegal and you could go to jail for it. There's nothing holding it. And having had a shit ton of fun in those scenes, also having seen the dark side and having seen friends go down long dark loops of drug addiction, seeing some people not make it at all, and also having a sense that actually once I got connected to whatever is going on here online, it's more interesting somehow, that there's something in that world that I came from that was both intensely alive and dynamic, but also stuck, almost unable. Sometimes the metaphor is used, unable to do anything vertical. So doing lots of horizontal expression, noise, movement, participation, fun, ecstasy, but ultimately socially and politically impotent. And I think having this framing of Sutra and Tantra gives it a sense of, oh, actually, there is a place for that stuff within a mature religion, within a mature society, which already is a more sophisticated approach from the one that I said of that the mainstream society looks on this stuff and says, this is illegal, you should go to jail if you're caught with drugs in your pocket. The tantric attitude says, no, actually, this is a totally reasonable place to go into. Actually, perhaps we need it. But also, you need the structure. You need zones outside of it where people are not living that way. You need enough of a social fabric, a community fabric, a conceptual fabric that people know not to live in that space, but to go into there and then step out of it and to go and how to have a thriving ordinary life, how to have a professional life, how to have reasonable, meaningful relationships with the people around you, with your family, rather than just going down a loophole of death. And it's funny now to see, knowing several people involved in the music scene who are now in their 40s and 50s, reacting against that. There's this big vogue, maybe it's just London, but there's this big clean vogue in the music scene now that everybody wants to become a wellness guru and into yoga, and you don't need to drink at parties, you don't need to do drugs at festivals, you don't need to get fucked up. We can get behind that. I'm kind of here for the getting fucked up, but doing it in a more sophisticated way.
I think that in some sense, summarizes, I think, what Thomas's personal ethics is, which is I'm here for the getting fucked up, but in a more sophisticated way. And I think like his main commentary is always that people are getting fucked up in an unsophisticated way, and the getting fucked up is leaking everywhere. And there actually are no more sutric containers anymore to hold sort of that tantric energy. And so you just get sort of like, the tantra of junk food and like shitty TV shows and
a lot of techno music, so much like this hard techno music. It's so much so in, that's also
and maybe also bad cheap sex, one night stands and stuff like this.
Yeah, Instagram kink. And it's everybody is now a sex party diva.
To me,
but
building
go to these mainstream sex parties and they're intensely boring for the most part.
Yeah,
and
I mean, to me,
sit on a sofa and talk about how ridiculous everybody looks.
Okay, I would like to bring in something else into this conversation, because we can think about the Tantra and the Sutra divide in different ways. We can think about it in a kind of sublimated way or differently, like techno music, for example, would be this kind of Dionysian intoxication. Like, who goes to techno parties uh, while not being fucked up? People don't do that because like it's quite horrible. Like when you're on ecstasy or something, it's like wow, but when you're not, it's not really that good of music. So but then there's also the sexual divide, right? Like sexually you have to contain your sexuality, and then you can go to the sex workshops and sex cults and things like that. And actually today I've just been thinking about, like, is sex like art, or is art like sex? Sometimes people would describe sex as if it was an art, and I think there's something to that. But art is like a sublimated kind of sex, and this is like, I think, to become cultivated, to become uncultured, and not to like let loose into intoxication leading to the worst type of infantile regression. It's all about sublimation of sexual energies. So yeah, what do you guys think about that?
I mean, I think that's what I was talking about with the cheap. It's everything's cheap tantra. What I mean by cheap tantra is sort of like the immediacy of sexual energy. And I think, like, to me, the challenge of our time is, again, more, for me, it's using Thomas's language, it's developing those sutras which allow a containment for, and at the same time, those sutra containers that allow the tantric expression within those new containers. But, it's very difficult to think that through precisely.
I think also it's very difficult because, like, relate this to your personal life. It's very hard to separate lust and love. It's especially if we've probably all had that, when you're in a state of being that's like lustful, but you're a bit confused about it and you think it's love. Whereas, like, to actually go from lust to love, it's like a lot of times we try to find love and all we get is lust. So these are yeah, I think this is something where the human mind really kind of goes wild, like
That's the
personally.
ground zero of the problem. Like, the ground zero of the problem is basically people's unmediated lust, and people not, people stumbling through, and I think that's the thing, is that, like, I think, to me, the Dark Renaissance is a signifier that makes a unique space for the stumbling through of the process of lust and love. Because I think that oftentimes also people can sort of want to obfuscate that sublimation problem by just jumping straight to love and just, self-denying on the level of lust. I think you do need to sort of make mistakes in this field. At least I did.
The thing that came to mind for me, actually, I was thinking about your recent article, Cadell, on techno-socialism and the passages where you're talking about intergenerational transmission, mentorships, elders, and so on. That's something that can exist within this tantric state, this Dionysian state, but which largely doesn't in the unreflective, chaotic, undifferentiated nightclub scenes of the world at the moment. There's almost this liberal ethic imperative, which is, it's your right to go and explore sexuality. It's your right to go and explore your consciousness. Go do drugs, go do whatever, blah, 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 blah. Go do it. You go do it. But there's no one there to say, combine this with this. Don't do that. Try this. Don't do that. You went too far there. You fucked up there. And it just didn't look very good, and you're not going to get invited again. That is the sort of thing that actually enables, I think, the sublimation of it and the skillful refinement of these things, so they can become more and more of an art.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, actually, because it's to me, what you're articulating, Owen, is like in a very sort of, I think, processual way, which I think is key. this in-between space that avoids like a cheap moralism, like don't do it at all, versus sort of just an unbounded excess. You know, there is an in-between, and how do we be the types of beings and be the types of friends and build the types of networks where those processes can be simply, you know, I think that's important.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that might actually be the hyper-humanist way. In like, if the hyper-humanist way is sort of seeing the positive of technology, but not reducing the human to technology as an end in itself, and making room for the messiness of the human. Well, precisely the messiness of the human is this sublimation process, which I think at its core is like what Dimitri is saying, this relationship between lust and love, and how do these two things go together? And, you know, I think that's a hyper-humanist project to me, or, you know, that's the process of if we're less than human, if we're not living up to being human, and being sort of reduced to mechanics, I think that's the place where I would want relationships to, those are the spaces I would want relationships to thrive.
Yeah, it's how do I hold my humanity, all of it? And then what do I do with it?
Philip, have you been there with us, or are you coming in and out?
I'm struggling with my computer. I think it's near the end of its life cycle now, so this is definitely less than a machine, you know. So, but I some of it gets through.
Yeah, what do you think, David? We've been talking about, you know, lust and love, sublimation, you know, mimetic rivalry, hyperhumanism. Where are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, there is something very human about this interplay between prohibition and transgression, right? That when we can do everything, the sort of ritual potential of doing it gets watered out. And when we're exposed to everything, it's like it's just dopamine kicks all the time. So reinstating that sort of everyday prohibition or some restraints on your life is like, I feel super important. And for me, it's often about just managing my calendar. Like certain periods of the year, I do a lot of work. I enter a more creative mode, and other years I do festivals. You know, I go partying, and I plan for that in advance. Like this week I'm going there, and that weekend I'm doing this, and then I know, like, okay, the rest of the time is ordinary time where I work, I study, I you know, do maintenance of you know, the spaces I live in, my relationships, and so on. So I think a lot of it is just practically managing your calendar as well, and setting intentions for the future.
All right, I do want to. Yeah, do you want to say something here, Dimitri?
Oh yeah. So I think the artist and the philosopher always has to mediate between chaos and discipline. And in ancient Greek, chaos meant a gaping abyss. So it was actually nothingness. You know, if we immediately associate with the word chaos, what comes to my mind is like a lot of things. But actually, at the heart of chaos, it's a gaping abyss, and this gaping abyss is productive. You need that. You know, you need to not consume, but stay in a state of kind of indeterminate emptiness, or maybe even like a state of boredom, or a state of I don't know what to do. And naturally things will emerge philosophically or artistically that will be that can be of very high quality, definitely higher than if you would just like merely structure it. So that's the problem. If you get rid of the gaping abyss, if you get rid of the chaos and the indeterminacy there, you lose your creativity. That's all.
Creation ex nihilo. I mean, coming up onto sort of maybe some concluding framings of what's going on here, I did want to sort of bring up in the context of, let's say, Frege's topic of ontological design, he constantly references ontological design. Of course, he wrote a great book on ontological design. That we are designing, like that the consequences for construction, the consequences for projects like this are not merely epistemological but ontological. That we're building new spaces that have never existed before. Do you think that this sort of activity or this sort of event is pushing into space a space of novel ontological design? Give that to anyone.
I actually think we are, and like I mentioned earlier, like we're in the burner scene, for example. There's a lot of people who are really good at doing artistic events, raves and different gallery activities and all that. And then we have the conference philosophy side of it, but these two rarely meet. And rarely, of course, if you're at a big burn, you get everything all the time, but doing like in a structured way like this, I think there's something novel about that. That's at least the reaction we have from all the co-creators involved in this project, and that this is something that people are actually craving. And perhaps this is also goes into the Sutra Tantra divide we talked about a bit earlier in this conversation, that Friday night is going to be it's going to be very tantric compared to a academic conference, but it will be quite sutra compared to the Saturday, at least. So yeah, there's some novelty there, I guess.
The thing that
and also bringing, like, pointing to this importance of as Kelly often talk about, the importance of long-term conceptual mediation, like actually thinking, because a lot of people these days have a lot of resistance to actually sitting down with a heavy book and working through it. So and especially maybe in these more artistic, creative context where there's a lot of, I think, good movement towards embodiment and being mindful in the now and so on, but it's like as soon as you go to the abstract level, people like, oh, I don't want to think about that, but we need both of those poles to actually deal with these questions that we've been addressing today.
Absolute recoil. Owen, do you want to jump in on this topic as well?
Yeah, one of the good lines from ontological design, I think, that Daniel has is the big lesson of virtual reality is that all reality is virtual. And what I take from that is this sense that most social spaces, certainly social events, are scripted to a degree. There are expected behaviors and there are schedules. There's something that is created beforehand as a virtuality, as a stamp on the potential, the infinite potential of what could happen, so as that you get a conference as opposed to a bunch of academics showing up and having a bitch fight. Now, the interesting thing with where we're at is that this network seems to be getting fed up with most of the cultural spaces that we would ordinarily have gone and been in 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So there's a sense of how much can we reinvent? And so what are the virtualities that we need to project to stamp onto these physical meetings so that stuff can happen that's interesting and not messy? And precisely because these conversations are happening in cyberspace, there's this extra layer of virtuality to it. We have these international digital networks, and then say, I mean, take the five of us here, for example. We were all together in France last year. We were all together in France the year before. I've seen others of you at different points, but there's just these tiny moments where everything gets together, and based on whatever virtuality we've projected beforehand, we do things. And it becomes, again, this is Fraga's point, it becomes a design discipline. What are you going to be crafting? What do you script beforehand so that in these incredibly precious moments, the day or the week that you get with the people that you never see, what unfolds there?
I mean, I think that in that sense, you know, we've been ontologically designing for, you know, we've been ontologically designing for years now. And then there's the sort of the question of, we're moving away from certain socially scripted backgrounds, and then there's that question of, we don't just want to be in the infinite potential of sort of anything can happen, but we want a different sort of social background, and what will that look like? You know, I think that does bring us to also sort of the political economic dimensions of things as well. Just trying to think of a way here in to talk about things like techno-feudalism, techno-socialism, and maybe even specifically your recent article, Owen, on on being a techno-gypsy.
Oh, Lord, that's a can of worms.
Sorry?
That's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, I want to open that can of worms and sort of see where we can go with it, because like my immediate sort of reaction is like, I really like the way you were sort of depicting the types of social groups we're a part of as kind of like universalizing the you know, like making the connection to the gypsy class and the Jewish class as like a successful gypsy class, and that they're sort of universal in their alienness, and at the same time always rupturing political discourses. But actually, like thinking that sort of a nomadic group, a wandering group, could actually also be politically and economically powerful. You know, not just sort of marginal, fringe, or sort of, you know, like you were saying, stereotyped as like dirty, violent, or poor. Is like, you know, what are your thoughts on that? What, I mean, is you know, the Techno Gypsy article is sort of like talking about the risks of that lifestyle, the loneliness, the brokenness, being broke, but also the conditions of possibility for political power at the same time. Do you always see yourself on the outskirts of the center of power in this model?
Yeah, I mean, so I wrote that article. You can find it at Dark Renaissance Radio on Substack. In response to the article that you wrote, Cadell, about techno-socialism, where there was a lot that I thought was brilliant and that I agreed with, but I also had this pessimism in the face of just the state of power and technology at the moment, that I really, really struggled to envision what a socialism or a socialist revolution or even a democratic socialism would look like in this state where we have a tiny minority of people who control almost all of the technology and almost all of the wealth. It doesn't suggest any kind of immediate solution as to how that is suddenly shifted in the balance of ordinary people. I don't even see what the coordination mechanism of that might be, other than a kind of left-wing Yarvinism. So one of the conversations around the Silicon Valley American elite tech class is this Yarvinism, which is this idea of a monarchy, an potentially human monarch who is essentially the dictator. And if you could have that on the right, then you could theoretically imagine a left-wing Yarvinism where you have a Stalin, a cyber Stalin, who is theoretically arranging the digital landscape for the good of the masses as opposed for an elite. That, I fuck knows what that would look like, but also it doesn't particularly appeal to me. So then I go, what does actually my life world look like? And what does the life world of us, the people who I spend most of my time with, look like? And it is this fringe existence, this gypsy existence, trying to hack out a precarious existence, having a relatively nomadic lifestyle, but at the same time not being totally dependent on the structures that currently exist, having a parallel culture, building slowly a parallel infrastructure, parallel ecosystem, and now trying to find ways to go back and be in dialogue and productive tension, productive creativity with the types of big established structures that exist and the new structures that are emerging as part of this huge new digital power center. Alexander Bard's calling it a global empire, which I think something in that hits the nail on the head. And as you pointed out, to think the distinction between what you think of as dirty, unsophisticated gypsies or Jews as a successful gypsy class, which has managed to remain nomadic, have their people everywhere, have a very, very strong social infrastructure. Jews even today largely participate in the religious rituals without even having to believe in the metaphysics of it, but they say, we just do it because we're Jewish. This is who we are. This is what we do. And there's an intrinsic value in that. And often they become very successful, very motivated people. There's a lot to learn from that way of being, I think. And that's what I'm thinking my way towards. And also writing it as a kind of provocation for myself and for others is, how can we be more useful and more engaged in that sense? So not just being outsiders on the fringe of a thing, but being outsiders who are still helping the center grow and improve and refine.
Yeah, it's like that connection between outsideness and universality that I was sort of, appreciating in that. And at the same time, I feel like, where I sort of have, an inner pushback or an inner friction is precisely at this level of seeing empire as a type of regression and seeing sort of the precarious existence being sort of structurally absurd. And at the same time, recognizing that the structural absurdity of the precarious existence could also lead to very creative activities precisely because of the precarity of the situation. Not sure if anyone else. Yeah, go ahead, Owen.
I mean, you say empire is regression. It could be. The problem is I just struggle to think a high horizon beyond it at the moment. I think that's the thing. If it's a regression, okay, fine, but what else is there? And that's what I mean.
That's I guess that's where I would put the necessity for theoretical thinking about concrete universality. And is there a meaningful political response to the universality of platform capital, basically?
Yeah, could be. I don't see it, and I don't.
No, I don't. I mean, no, that's where we need thinking.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to bring David, Filip, and Dimitri in on this topic. I mean, maybe like the closing thought is like sort of being in sort of the global empire of platform capital, and sort of, do you accommodate yourself to the currently existing social infrastructures as soulless and dead as they are? I think Dimitri spoke to that really well at the beginning of our conversation. Or how do you, as I think Owen was describing really well just now, and I think what we are kind of, either implicitly or explicitly doing, building types of parallel ecosystems, which we do resonate, which we do feel is alive, and at the same time sort of battling with the precariousness of that tightrope walking, and maybe just get some thoughts on how you guys relate to this situation personally. You want to lead us off, Filip?
Well, we haven't talked that much about Christianity today, so I guess I have to bring in some Christianity here, right? And then a call back to what we were talking about last time, and I liked your essay, Owen, about techno gypsies and having these parallel systems. And okay, here's from a Christian point. When we all gather, we gather in Holy Spirit. When we gather physically, and we have to emphasize that at this moment, that we have to gather physically. And I'm also thinking actually about Hakim Bey, the anarchist writer, and he talks about how we shouldn't plot revolutions. A revolution is something, or that we should plot insurrections instead of revolutions. So a revolution is something that actually changed society, and the insurrection was something that was shut down and failed. But something was very alive in that. It was like a surge of something. And if we do plot things like that with temporality installed from the get-go, like as a premises of doing that, then maybe we can create truly transformative events, and create stronger bonds to each other, and become that band of brothers and sisters and whatever traveling the world, and ultimately causing change in that way. And that's ultimately what I'm interested in doing, is creating strong bands that travel the world and do novel, crazy shit that perhaps might change the world, and perhaps we will fail. That's the risk of it. But creating bands, traveling the world, taking a risk, and see where it takes us. That's what I'm all about, and that's why we're doing this event in March in Gothenburg.
Fantastic. Good to bring it back around to the event in Gothenburg. For anyone who's just joining us, or for anyone who doesn't quite know what this conversation is pointing towards, there are links in the description to an event, More Than Machine, Less Than Human. It's going to be a live physical event, March 1st and March 2nd. And so if you're interested in that, and if you're so adventurous to come and join us, you can find out all details about that at one of the links in the description. David, is there anything coming up for you on this topic?
Well, I'm kind of in a situation in my life right now where I don't have family. I can take some risks in terms of my financial situation. I don't have other lives depending on having that stable income stream. So I'm kind of looking to take advantage of that and actually try to not get caught up too much in the logic of like that, the capitalist society, but also steadily finding ways to interface to those income questions of income and so on, because it's something about, of course, commercial value is not everything, but it's something about creating things that actually have an impact in society that's also related to these commercial flows. So that's a tension I'm in right now as well, personally. And yeah, it's interesting to explore.
Dimitri, what about you? What are you feeling right now?
I'm thinking a lot about 19th century Germany, and I'm not a traditionalist by any means, but sometimes I think that 19th century Germany was really the best we humans could bring to this earth. And after that, it kind of decayed. But it's there's a truth to what I'm saying, because we in 19th century Germany we have figures like Schelling, Hegel, Kant, Marx, Wagner, Nietzsche, and the list goes on and on. And the amount of creative explosion and concentration of thought and new forms of expression that we get from 19th century Germany is mind-blowing. For example, I discovered that actually rap doesn't come from America. No. It was German. It's called Sprechgesang. And actually, Wagner would use this in his operas. People would be rapping. They would be spitting bars in 19th century Germany, and I wholeheartedly agree with the spirit of everything that Filip said, and I think that we must do better than 19th century Germany right now, and we must we have a need for true novelty, and we can truly bring this about because of all the talent that is present. So yeah, that's where my hopes are.
All right. I mean, I always heard the founder of hip hop was, I think, Africa Bambaataa, but maybe it's Wagner.
Wagner. I swear to God, Gezang.
Totally approve of this absurd revisionism of history.
All right, so I just want to say, yeah, again, to everyone listening, anyone just tuning in, More Than Machine, Less Than Human. It's going to be a live physical event in Gothenburg, put on by Dark Renaissance Productions. I've been here with Owen Cox, Filip, Lundström, David Högberg, who are really the core of Dark Renaissance Productions, as well as Dimitri Crooijmans, who will be with us at the event. The speaker list, as you can sort of find on the links in the description, is going to be Thomas Hamelrich, Thomas Hamelrich, artificial intelligence expert and wild Girardian theorist, Carl Hayden Smith, a hyper-humanist, world-class researcher in psychology and psychedelics, Daniel Frege, author of Ontological Design, and myself. So I think it's going to be a great event, and it's not just going to be the philosophical discussions, it's also going to be an artistic performance. Maybe we could just have some closing thoughts from each of you, is like, maybe what are your hopes for this event, and what are your hopes for not only this event, but maybe what this event signifies or represents to what you hope might be a transformation of our various networks towards thinking more locally, physically, and maybe the relationship with the virtual and the physical. Owen, do you want to give your sort of...
Yeah, sure. I mean, first I'm just going to say, finishing on what Dimitri was saying, I think the best statement on the dialogue between white culture and black culture comes from AC/DC's Let There Be Rock, where he sings, "White man had the chops, black man had the blues." Aside from that, Dark Renaissance Productions, the event, I think it's going to be, I hope it's going to be explosive. I think the minds in the room on the first night are fucking brilliant, and it'll be amazing to see the four of you guys speaking and talking and interacting with the audience in that environment. I've not seen it, the Hayes Enrique Palazzo in Gothenburg, but from what I hear from Filip and David, it's an awesome space. Very cool vibe for the sort of stuff we're going for. And then the Saturday, we've got a great list of performers and artists that's growing, and I'm just super interested and excited to see what will come out of it, basically. And I hope people listening are interested and might consider coming along. We have several links, and there's a Telegram group you can join, Dark Renaissance HQ, which you'll be able to find in the links by going on the link tree probably, and then that's where we're posting loads of updates and loads of stuff, blogs and YouTubes and stuff. So if people are interested in this conversation but not thinking about flying to Gothenburg this time, join there, and then you can stay up to date with everything else that's happening. But I think it's a cool time to jump on board and be part of something, and be part of this moment where lots of us are trying to get off of the internet into the physical space, but continue the type of philosophical and artistic momentum that we've been building up. And so there's an invitation there. Please come and join us.
All right, Filip, what about you?
I want to say something about Gothenburg, because one of the reasons we are doing this in Gothenburg is not just because me and David live in Gothenburg. It's because we love Gothenburg. And Gothenburg is a very special town in Sweden. It's the second biggest town, and that's an important thing. It's not the biggest town, it's not the capital. That means it's a town that doesn't have to compare itself to other capitals around the world, but can sort of do its own thing. But it is a big town, so that makes it an interesting place to work at. So, and Gothenburg has known for having its own like weirder vibe. We have Gothenburg jokes. In heavy metal, we have the Gothenburg sound. So I'm excited to bring everyone to Gothenburg to experience that. And it's a town that I fall in love with, and I just can't wait to fall in love with other towns and do the same thing in other places. So I want to end on that note today.
David?
Yeah, no, I'm just really excited about this now, and for me, this is a lot about prototyping different formats that can either work or not. We're gonna find out, and setting some labels and framings that then others can enter into and do their thing. So this is also very much a co-creative process that we really want to, if this really spurs your interest or creative ideas now, get in touch with us. We would love to cooperate with a lot of people in this project. So yeah, and also I just want to say a shout out to Raven Connolly, is also a big part of this process. She's not here today, but
Yeah,
she's
definitely shout out to Raven. Yeah, too bad she couldn't join us tonight. Dimitri, I'll give you the last word. What are you thinking? What are you looking forward to at this event?
I'm looking forward to see if Gothenburg truly lives up to what Filip said about it. I'm curious to see how hyperhuman the event will be and how mimetic things will go down. So yeah, it's exciting. It was a great surprise, when I found out. Holy shit, I'm gonna go to Sweden. That's cool. I'm gonna go to Gothenburg. Yeah, I'm excited.
All right. So on that note, we'll end. More than machine, again, more than machine, less than human. Links are in the description. Hope to see you there March 1st and March 2nd for a philosophical, artistic, religious symposium. Owen Cox, Filip Lundström, David Högberg, Dimitri Crooijmans, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me this evening. And for everyone who tuned in, have a great night.